DW Africa Link.
Hit the brakes. The auto industry in South Africa is crashing. Car manufacturing company Ford recently announced that its plants in South Africa are letting go of almost 500 people as it struggles to keep up with collapsing exports, surging imports, and tough tariffs. Now, this is not just a statistic. It's a human story of families facing uncertainty in a sector that's crucial for the country's economy. It concerns how people can pay rent, school fees, and put food on the table. So what's driving these cuts, and what do they mean for South Africa's future?
For us, it's not gonna work it because we have more. There is no one that we're working, grandparents, a lot of things. I have to look after it. If these things can continue like this, obviously, most South Africans, I can even say Africans, gonna be in big trouble when it comes to the issue of Donald Trump and the motto. I can even add it again that Donald Trump is only think about himself or his country. They don't care about other peoples or other Africans. I can say Africans because this issue is growing. When it started, it looked like it's a fight between African and America, but there is no such.
That's what's coming up. I am Eddie Micah Jr., and you are welcome to Africa Link, the podcast connecting you to the stories that matter.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
In the first half of 2025, South Africa's vehicle exports to the United States dropped by a staggering 80%. Now, this drastic decline is primarily, but not entirely, due to the US imposing a 30% tariff on South African goods. This tariff has significantly increased the cost of South African vehicles in the US market, making them less competitive. It's a big deal because South Africa's auto industry makes up about 5% of GDP. It employs more than 100,000 people and indirectly supports countless more. But the sector is export heavy. Roughly 2/3 of vehicles are sold abroad. Now that makes it a hostage to global demand and international politics. The unions are warning that Ford's cuts could be the tip of the iceberg. If tariffs stay in place, other automakers could scale back. And in a country where unemployment already sits above 30%, that is dangerous territory. For more on this, let's bring in Thierry Dubuisson, economic researcher at Solidarity Research Institute. I also have DW's Diane Hawker in Johannesburg, South Africa. Hello, both of you. Welcome to Africa Link. Diane, how are people in South Africa talking about this? Is the finger pointing at the government, at Ford, or even at US tariffs? How's the discussion going?
Well, I would say the discussions in South Africa are leading with concern, definitely, because I think when the US tariffs were announced, there was a feeling that we would start to see shocks. And I would say perhaps the retrenchments at Ford are the beginning of those shocks. Even though Ford South Africa has previously told me that they don't export to the US, it does seem like the ecosystem of vehicle production is feeling those shocks. Interestingly, I had done a story recently for DW speaking to some of the people in the vehicle sector, and they had said that already from the announcement of those tariffs, they started to see decreases in the number of vehicles going to the US. But what they were also concerned about is, even though they were able to start looking at other areas where they could export vehicles to, and this is not necessarily Ford, but other producers, that the markets are not the same. So it really has necessitated the talk and introduction of the US tariffs has created a real change in the vehicle sector globally. And those changes have also kind of ricocheted, I would say, into the South African market. And the concern is how extensive that ricochet will be these jobs that we're now seeing, the retrenchments that we're seeing at Ford, will that be the end of it, or is it just the beginning of something more? And I'm sure that our guest Tiens will also be able to come in with a bit more of perspective on that. But I would say it's definitely something that's being viewed with concern,
right,
from the South African labor market, concern from those in the auto sector as to what might happen next. But also, I think it's important, and just for context of our discussion, is that the auto sector is a big feeder in South Africa, and that's where the concern, I think, becomes bigger, that many of the auto companies are based in specific regions. So, for example, Ford has a plant in Silverton. It also has an engine manufacturing facility in Gqeberha, in a place there. So when you see those facilities, oftentimes they are also supporting other smaller businesses like parts manufacturers. And then there are other smaller businesses, like going as far down to the ladies who are selling lunch to the workers outside the front gate. And so all of those, these shifts actually impact the ecosystem to a broader extent.
right. Thanks for that explanation, because I was really wondering, if Ford South Africa says they don't export to the US market, why are they being hit and why are they laying off workers? But it's a whole ecosystem, isn't it? So many different sites are connected, and this is why it's such a big impact. Also, talking about impact, quite a success story, isn't it, Diane? The South Africa's auto industry. We're talking about, it makes up what, about 5% of GDP, and this is why it's such a big hit, isn't it?
It definitely is, has been one of our success stories, and one that really South Africans had been hoping would continue to grow. You know, BMW has quite a massive operation in South Africa. And also within BMW, the IT department services BMW across the world. So we're not only dealing with the nuts and bolts, but there are South Africans working on the more kind of technical vehicle computer components. You have Ford, you have Isuzu, you have Mercedes-Benz, also in the Eastern Cape, in Gqeberha, or in East London. So all these little manufacturing hubs have really kept communities going through tough times that we've seen, such as the global pandemic, and now even other tough economic times. So while the number of 470 does seem small, if one considers that on average in South Africa, one worker can support a minimum of 4 people, but sometimes 10 or more people within their family, you can see that that number of 400 really does have a bigger ripple effect. And that's partly due to the high unemployment that we have here, where those who do work have a lot more support that they have to give.
Right. Thanks, Dan. Talking about high unemployment, the latest statistics says it stands above 30%, which is pretty high. And so let me come to you, Tien. I mean, because unions have warned that the Ford decision could be the tip of the iceberg, right? If tariffs remain, more automakers may scale back production, and that could deepen South Africa's unemployment crisis. So it is really a big deal, isn't it, Tien?
Yes, Eddie, it's a very big deal. We expect to see more retrenchment notices from the auto sector and many other sectors, not necessarily just because of tariffs, but what we have seen in recent years is the car market in South Africa has grown a lot smaller. To give you an indication, for a very long time, your finance term when purchasing a vehicle was about 5 years. It's now gone up to 7 years. 20, 30 years ago, it was still 2 or 3 years. So people's expendable income has been declining massively. People are not purchasing vehicles anymore. Also, cheap imports from India and China has taken over a large chunk of the market, with roughly 60% of cars being sold in South Africa currently being imported from India. So because of this declining local market, vehicle manufacturers have often switched to manufacturing left-hand steered models for the export market to the US. Now with the 30% tariffs, which Trump intends to cause manufacturing to return to America. So I don't foresee that tariff being lifted on the auto industry. That market has fallen away, and now also one cannot simply take the export intended vehicles and export them to other markets within Africa, for instance, as most of Africa drives on the left side of the road, unlike America. Now, this conversion could be done, but then you still sit with the problem that America generally takes the more upmarket models for which there's not much of a market within Africa, or a very limited market at least.
Right. Right. I mean, so what you're saying is that there's so many different factors come into play, and it's obviously worsened, exacerbated by the U.S. tariffs on South Africa, which is causing more and more of these layoffs. From the union's perspective, what are the immediate impacts of these layoffs on workers and their families?
It's immense, especially if you look at your smaller cities like East London, like Port Elizabeth. If this sector starts to announce more retrenchments, these manufacturers are anchor employers in those communities. So in other words, all other industry and commerce is centered around this one massive employer that basically keeps the economy going. Much of the auto industry is concentrated in the Eastern Cape, as Diana said, and in some of these areas, they're by far the biggest employer. So if that starts to fall away or even reduces slightly, it has a massive impact on your retail sector, on the families themselves, on literally everything within that community. You're taking a large chunk of income out of that economy, and without which it unfortunately becomes unsustainable.
Yeah, sounds unsustainable. I mean, what's the worst case scenario here if exports continue to fall and layoffs spread?
Well, the worst case is that we lose our auto industry almost in its entirety. And people think it can't happen, but the climate in South Africa is becoming really worrisome. I mean, two major factors that reaches across the entire manufacturing sector is South Africa used to have very cheap electricity. We don't anymore. Our electricity continues to get more expensive year by year. And then also our transport infrastructure. Harbors are overloaded. Transnet railway lines, trains aren't as available as it should be at all times. We're hearing talks about the partial privatization of the railway industry, but that's been going on for a few years now, and not much has happened in that regard. So without cheap inputs like transport, like electricity, like steel, our largest steel manufacturer that manufactures these specialty steels used in the manufacturing of vehicles, amongst other things, is also now announced layoffs of between 3,000 and 4,000 people. So, I mean, if you don't have the steel, you don't have the electricity, and you don't have transport, a good functioning labor system does not really justify keeping your manufacturing capabilities in South Africa. And government has had chances to step in. I mean, Transnet and Eskom, the power supplier, both belong to government, they're state-owned entities, and the mismanagement of these entities through the years have absolutely caused this crisis.
Right. It's like, Diane, we're pointing the finger at the government also, because one would argue it's policies and, paying attention to detail and all. If that was done properly, maybe South Africa wouldn't be here. So what's the government saying? Are they trying to calm fears, or are they pushing back somehow?
Well, I think inevitably, Eddie, the fingers will end up pointing to a certain extent to the government. Yes, the US tariffs have been a big factor, and a factor that was difficult to prepare for. But what the government hasn't done is create a fluid environment. The issues that Tiens is bringing up of the electricity supply, steel production and transport, they make it difficult for the industries to be able to adapt to these external shocks, because they're still trying to deal with the fact that they can't even get the amount of cars that they're supposed to be producing for the existing markets to where they're supposed to be going. And I think that would be, if you speak to people within the business sector, for years they've been complaining about how the government hasn't created an easy business environment for investment, and also for people who have already invested to be able to do their work. Add on top of that, of course, the US tariffs, which don't only affect South Africa, but they've had global shocks. And that's why now we're also seeing that other countries that have historically perhaps purchased from South Africa might be, because of the tariffs, re-looking at things because of how it's an interconnected ecosystem. I recently spoke to a parts manufacturer who's based in Pretoria, and he was saying that he's based in Pretoria because Ford is in Pretoria. He supplies bumpers, spray painted bumpers to Ford. And even though Ford doesn't export, what they have seen is that because of the tariffs, other countries that have been impacted by the tariffs are now reassessing whether they wanted to buy Fords. So for him, that was how this interconnected system and the external shocks ended up affecting him. But then it becomes difficult for him if he now wants to start looking at an African market, because how does he get products to that market? There's a lot of talk about the Africa Free Trade area as a potential solution, and it's something that the government has mentioned as a solution, but the answer of how has not been adequately answered. And that's something we're hearing not only from the motor industry, but from different industries. I've spoken to people in citrus, for example, and they're complaining about the same thing. They export via ships that they have to lease themselves. If we're going to start looking at other regions, how?
Right, how? So the government, from my understanding of what you've just said, is trying to find solutions, but it's not realistic solutions as things stand now. And so people expect more from the government. But Theuns, what is the union doing or planning to do to support workers affected by these layoffs? I mean, are there ongoing negotiations, strikes, or other collective actions? What are you doing about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not much use striking at a company that's already facing financial distress. So we'd like to avoid that at all costs. But we'd like to help government and these businesses in finding alternative markets, in making plans, also exerting pressure on government. We've sent a delegation to the US as well to try to influence policymakers there to, at the very least, grant exemptions to some of these distressed companies that we have in South Africa now. But if we can step back to the origin of these tariffs, South Africa's government knew that they were coming. Everyone knew it. I mean, that was during Trump's campaign. Pretty much all he talked about was all the tariffs he's going to impose on everyone. And in his letter to the South African government, he's very clear on what he wants. And it's not difficult things. He wants the balance of trade between South Africa and the US to be balanced. And that's not a very difficult thing to do. I mean, if South Africa stops buying oil from countries like Iran and rather buys it from America, oil costs the same everywhere in the world. So without spending any additional money, we can, whether we want to or not, or whether you like Trump or not, if that's to the benefit of the workers, then that's something that must be done, to purchase oil from the US rather than elsewhere. The same applies to other imports like grain, which is traded internationally at the same price everywhere. South Africa imports quite a lot of grain. We can do that from the US, even if it's just to return the trade balance to what Trump would like it to be, which is ridiculous. I mean, the balance of trade does not matter as much as Trump would like us to believe. But if that's to the benefit of workers in South Africa, then government should step aside from their ideological convictions for a while and turn a blind eye to that and give Trump his way in this regard.
Right. So in a sense, you're saying South Africa's government to suck up to Trump if that's what it takes to protect workers.
Well, I mean, it's unpleasant, but at this point, it's the only option we really have. South Africa is not really in a position to bargain with the greatest economy in the world. And we rely on them. They're one of our biggest export markets, whether we like it or not. And I can assure you, we don't like it. It's unfortunately what has to be done at this point.
Right. Dan, come in here.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what Tiens is saying, but I do think it's a little bit more complex than that. Yes, there are products like the ones that he's mentioned, like oil and grain, but the US has also raised the issue of pork and chicken. And you might wonder, what does pork and chicken have to do with the auto industry? But essentially, what they've said is that they want to be able to send more pork and chicken products to South Africa, a country that produces those very products. So in putting together its deal, the South African government does have to consider a wide range of industries and to make sure that our local agricultural industries, automotive industries, and other sectors are not going to be disadvantaged by making these concessions to the US. So I think that's the part which makes the negotiation process a little bit more complicated, because you're going to be talking about pork and chicken, but it's going to be impacting on other industries. And where do you decide who's going to take the hit? Do you decide that for the betterment of some industries, you're prepared to lose jobs in other industries? Or do you try to save jobs across the board? I certainly am not saying that I have all the answers, but I am saying that I think it is quite a complicated process because of the industries that we are involved in.
Yeah, I didn't know about this. What, pork and chicken? I mean, that's definitely going to be affecting the local market, isn't it? But yeah, it's definitely more complicated than it seems. But both points definitely well noted. Things, it's important we're talking about this because, for unions like yours, what you think about it is trying to engage with efforts to, in this case at least, diversify export markets or transition to green energy solutions in the auto industry. That's according to an expert that I spoke to. How important is it now?
Yes, it's immensely important. We should be looking at alternative export markets, even without the US tariff situation, because you want to have a diversified export market regardless. But the fact remains that there is no market like the US market. If you look at especially the fruit industry, many orchards in South Africa are producing citrus and apples that only get exported to the US, and there aren't really alternative markets for some of these, or alternative markets at the size and extent of these US markets. The same applies to some automakers, same applies to manufacturing in general. So it must be done, but unfortunately, there is not much of an alternative to the US market.
Thanks, Du Buisson, economic researcher, Solidarity Research Institute. Many thanks for your time. Also, DW's Diane Hawker in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Get the stories that are shaping the continent here on Africa Link.
Now, in recent years, there have been 12 company closures and more than 4,000 job losses across the automotive and parts sectors. Ford's decision to lay off hundreds more workers is very concerning. So what are the options? Some argue that South Africa should pivot to new markets through the African Continental Free Trade Area. But this is a long-term strategy, as roads, customs, and logistics are not yet ready. Others argue that this crisis could fast-track a shift to green manufacturing, electric vehicles, and local battery plants. But that requires a significant investment and clear policy. Now, despite the challenges, these potential solutions, I believe, offer a glimmer of hope, right? But for now, workers need immediate answers: social safety nets, retraining, and industrial policies to cushion the blow. So what do you think? Kindly share your thoughts with us on our Facebook page, DW Africa. Listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Don't forget to click follow and subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe. And I am Eddie Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.
DW, made for minds.